The man who found the first grave stopped in the orchard because something in the ground looked wrong. In the soft earth between rows of trees, a patch of dirt had been disturbed and tamped down again, not by rain, but by a shovel. He had worked this land long enough to know the difference. When he scraped at it, the smell came up first, thick and unmistakable, and he backed away with his hand over his mouth. Within minutes, deputies were on the Sullivan Ranch along the Feather River north of Yuba City, and when they dug, their shovels struck cloth, then flesh. They uncovered a man buried face down in the soil, hidden beneath the same ground that was supposed to grow fruit. It did not end there. The next day, they found another grave nearby, then another. Deputies marked the orchard rows with flags and kept digging, moving from one disturbed patch of earth to the next. The graves were not scattered across miles of wilderness. They were clustered in the same farm country, in peach and prune orchards, and in river-bottom brush, as if someone had chosen the quietest places where men passed through and disappeared. Each time deputies cut into the earth, they were met with the same reality: a transient laborer, dead and hidden, in a place where nobody expected to look. The victims were men who lived at the edges of the Sacramento Valley's economy, migrant and seasonal workers who took short-term jobs, slept in cheap rooms or makeshift camps, and moved on when the work ended. They often carried everything they owned in a bag. Some drifted from ranch to ranch, following rumors of hiring. In that world, a man could vanish, and days could pass before anyone asked a question. If he had no fixed address, no close family nearby, no employer expecting him the next morning, he could simply be gone. Whoever was burying bodies in the orchards understood that kind of invisibility and used it. As the graves multiplied, fear moved through the county in a strange, uneven way. Orchard owners worried about their fields and their reputations. Laborers worried about getting into the wrong truck at the wrong time, about accepting a ride from someone who promised work. Deputies worked under the pressure of a growing list of dead men and a public that wanted a name, any name, to attach to what was happening. Investigators began building the timeline from the last places the victims had been seen alive. Some were known to have been looking for work around Yuba City. Some had been seen drinking in bars. Others had been spotted near hiring spots, lingering with the other men who waited for growers and contractors to pull up. Witnesses described victims climbing into a pickup truck with a man who offered a job and a ride. The description led back to someone who had access to that world every day, a labor contractor who could move through the valley without raising suspicion. His name was Juan Vallejo Corona. Corona was not a stranger in the area. He was part of the farm labor system, a man who could supply crews when ranches needed hands. In a county built on seasonal work, that gave him access to the men nobody tracked closely. It gave him a reason to ask questions. Where were you staying? Did you need a job? And it gave him a reason to drive them out to the river or the orchards. To a migrant worker, a contractor was a lifeline. A ride could mean food that night. The power imbalance was built into the job. As deputies dug more graves along the Feather River and in the orchards, small pieces of paper began to surface with the bodies, items that should not have been there unless someone had handled them. Investigators found receipts and bank deposit slips that bore Corona's name. In one grave, deputies recovered meat receipts with his signature. In another, they found bank slips printed with his name and address. It was not the kind of evidence that played like a confession. It was the kind that tied a suspect to a place he should not have been, at a moment when the county was trying to understand how 25 men ended up under the same soil. Deputies also heard more reports about Corona's truck. Men described him driving around, offering rides and work. Some of the victims had last been seen with him. On May 26, 1971, deputies served a search warrant at Corona's home in Yuba City and took him into custody. Inside, they seized items that made the case feel less like rumor and more like a pattern: blood-stained clothing, knives, a machete, and other weapons. Investigators also found documents that appeared to record names and dates, a private list that included several of the known victims. To law enforcement, it looked like a roster of men who had entered Corona's world and never come out. By then, the digging had revealed the scale. Authorities recovered 25 victims from the orchards and nearby river-bottom areas. Many had been stabbed repeatedly. Some had been cut with enough force that investigators described the wounds as hacking. Rows of trees that looked peaceful from the road had concealed bodies for weeks. Corona insisted he was not the murderer. The legal process moved through hearings and delays, but the pressure never left the case. When the trial began in Fairfield, California, the prosecution laid out a picture of a man who used his role as a contractor to pull victims close. He could approach men who needed rides and cash without raising alarm. He could drive them to isolated ranch land and river brush where nobody would hear a struggle. Then he could bury them in soft orchard soil that he knew would hide what was beneath. The defense attacked the investigation, raised questions about Corona's mental health and history, and argued that the evidence was circumstantial. But the jury listened to months of testimony and saw exhibit after exhibit. The paperwork recovered with the bodies, the weapons, the blood-stained items, the connection between Corona's movements, and the places where victims were found. In January 1973, the jury found Corona guilty of first-degree murder on all 25 counts. He received 25 life sentences. Walked the jury through the graves in the 1920s, walked the jury through the graves in the orchards, and the evidence tied to him. Again, jurors returned a guilty verdict, and in 1982, he was convicted once more and sent back to prison for the same 25 murders. For the families of the victims, there was no clean ending at all. Many of the dead men had lived transient lives, and identification took time. Some were known only by first names or nicknames, before investigators matched them to records and relatives. Their deaths exposed how easily the labor system could swallow people who did not have stable homes, steady paperwork, or anyone with power insisting they mattered. Corona spent decades behind bars. In March of 2019, the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation announced that he died in custody at the age of 85 while serving his sentences for the 25 counts of first-degree murder. The announcement closed a chapter for the state, but it did not change what the case had already shown in the farm country of Northern California: that a man with the right access could turn an entire landscape into a burial ground, and that the victims most at risk were often the ones the world was least prepared to notice. Thank you for listening to Homicide Files. Subscribe for more true crime stories.